you never saw a movie called To Brave Alaska, but that's a movie they made in Hollywood about finding those two kayakers that I did. So there's Bill DeCreeft in there, and Barbara's a cute little redhead, and it's corny. It was nowhere near as bad as what happened to those two kids. But it was one of those things that makes you want to brag because it turned out really well. I mean, they had killed their dog that night to eat it, and they couldn't eat it because they said, well, it's a friend, and it was raw, and couldn't swallow it, and they just said, let's just die then. And just in the evening, I came zinging by, you know, and then there were rocks there, so I'll tell you the story if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
I'm crying. Just keep going.
Well, they called me up. They called me up and said, you got an amphibian, right? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, is it, you know, everybody in Seward, their airplane is all covered with snow, or, you know, something's wrong, but we got to get to this mine and check on these two kids. And so if you can get over there, pick up some ore samples and see how they're doing and all that. And I said, well, okay. And it was over the mountains. And this was January, 3rd of January, cold, you know, really cold. And so I took off and I flew over there, and I was in the Widgeon. And so when I got over there, the pass was blocked. It was just snowing too hard. I couldn't get through. So I came back and I called up this character from Seward. And in the movie, they make me living in Seward, but I wasn't. I was down here. So I called him up and said, well, I couldn't get through. And today's Saturday, tomorrow's Sunday, and we generally try and take Sunday off. So how about if I just go on Monday? And he said, well, it's been quite a while. And I said, well, so how long? He said, well, 2.5 months. And I said, you mean there's two kids in a hard rock mine over in this bay in Alaska that nobody's talked to for 2.5 months? How do you know the building? How do you know everything didn't collapse on them? How do you know they're not trapped in there? All my instincts start, you know, I didn't know if they had blouses or not, but I could pretty close to it. They're under that tree.
Where's my horse?
So I went over the next day, and I went to the bay where the snow was about 10 feet deep, everywhere. No tracks anywhere. And I thought, well, they did say they had a skiff, so there's another gold mine up at the head of the bay. So I flew up there, and there's a skiff sitting on the beach, and a red flare goes up. I thought, oh, neat. And it was blowing about 40 miles an hour down the hill. It was Chinooking, and so it made it warm. It was below freezing, but that hot air had it, and I thought, well, I can land the Widgeon here. So I landed, and I taxied up to the beach. And a Widgeon is an amphibian like a goose, you know, with a boat nose. And I pulled right up to the beach, and I opened the nose hatch, and this black dog just jumped right in, sat right in the seat next to me, and he was there. And his name was Winchester, and I'll never forget him, just because of that. Winchester jumped in the airplane. The guy said, I'm sorry I flagged you down, but we're in trouble. And I said, well, I think I'm probably looking for you. And so there's Myra. So, tell her to take a seat. So, anyway, I said, well, I'm probably looking for you. And he said, yeah, I came from the Surprise Bay mine, and, you know, we were iced in, and I just got to get home. And I said, well, yeah, but what about the two kids? There were two young hippies. And he said, oh, they're dead. And I said, oh, geez, what happened? He said, well, they left here 3 weeks ago, and if they haven't gotten to town now and told you about me and everything else that's going on, they got to be dead. And I said, well, okay. And I took him to Seward. I gave him $20 to buy a hamburger because he was pretty hungry too. But he had found a snow machine at this mine, tried to get over the top of the mountain, blew the clutch, came back, welded the clutch with a welder he found somewhere, and then he'd spotted a moose that he was going to shoot, and he saw another moose. So he'd have made it through the winter. He was in good shape. But Roger and Denise this guy was kind of uncouth, and they were all in one cabin, and he kept farting and making remarks and hitting on Denise. So they said, well, we got to get out of here. So they moved out of that inner bay to an outer bay to a little cabin. And that's where they were. So when they ran out of food, they couldn't get into him because he was behind the ice. And so they got in their little kayak, loaded it down, and took off. And he knew that there was a logging camp, but it was actually way down on the end of the peninsula. That's where I used to pick up those sick loggers. But they had a map that only went so far. And the first 2 days they did really good. They were paddling along. But see, it was the 23rd of December, and those days are about 2 hours long. I mean, the sun comes up at 10, and you know. So, and as they were going by Gore Point, the sea started to get rough. And they came around the outside of Gore Point, and they came down that outside beach, and Denise said, Roger, let's quit here. And he said, no, let's, might be something around the corner. And she said, no, there is a beach, let's get on it. And the waves were already going up and down like this. And there were 30-foot seas by that night. So they got on the beach, they put up their little tent, they dragged the kayak up. In the middle of the night, kabam, this 30-foot wave hit them, blew the kayak all to pieces and knocked it around, took their tent and rowed it out to sea and left them with nothing. And so then they said, well, geez, what are we going to do now? So they tried to climb a waterfall that was frozen. He chopped holes with his knife. He got almost to the top. The knife broke. Down he went. Denise tried it, and she fell off. And the duffel bag they had that had the food and the stove and a blanket, that went into the ocean. So then they had nothing. And actually, I used to tell people, you should, on about the 3rd of January, you should get outdoors, strip down to nothing, wet your clothes, and roll up in an old blanket and spend the night under a spruce tree. And they did that for 13 nights. They tried to, and so anyway, that was before I took off looking for him. So the next morning, there was when I dropped him in town, and then the guy that owned it, and he was a drunk. He'd come out of his haze every once in a while and say, hey, somebody go down to the mine and see how they're doing. And he didn't even realize time was going by, so it was 2.5 months since he dropped him off and told him he'd be back in a couple of weeks. And their radio had quit. The last thing they heard, there was a war going on in Iran or something like that. And they said, see, nobody cares. They've forgotten about us. There's just nothing. We're just here. And so that's why they took off. Everybody, this went all over the world. It was in European newspapers, and it was just, I was in my 7th heaven when I actually found them in the Doberman Pinscher at work, So anyway, the next morning I went out to the airport, and there was a Coast Guard helicopter there, and I said, you guys, have you seen anything of the people? They said, no, but yeah, actually we could tell you. They were really keeping the information to their chest. I'm not proud of them, and this is another thing you'll have to clean out. But they didn't want to share this. I think they needed the credit, or it was worth, government funds or whatever it was. They weren't going to tell me anything. And I said, but they said, we did find 2 crossed canoe paddles on Gore Point Beach. And I said, well, then somebody's alive. And they said, well, yeah. So I said, well, do you mind if I fly over there too? They said, no, just kind of stay out of our way. And that wasn't snottiness. They just meant we don't want to have to worry about hitting each other. So away they went. And the way I went, my little widget, I went over there the next day. And I had found people before. And what happens is your boat sinks, you're sitting on the beach and thinking, oh God, now what? And zoom, an airplane flies by and it's gone. And you never got a chance to say anything or put up a sign or say hi even. And so what I used to do is fly right around the bay one time, make noise, and then they'll come out on the beach. And the best way to get found is just throw rocks in the water, because you can't wave anything as big as that big white splash. And it makes a big white splash, and the pilot sees it, and there you are. And I learned that from the fish and game guys. They'd say, well, we'll be on the beach somewhere, Bill, and we'll throw a rock in the water when it's time to pick you up. So anyway, I started looking for them, and I could see these footprints in the snow just going up and down, and it's a sheer cliff where they were. It was, Gore Point is the furthest point out. When they give the weather, they give you Gore Point North and Gore Point South. It's a tough spot. And so the Coast Guard helicopter was still in the area, and I called them and I said, there's tracks all over this beach. And they said, yeah, but there's no floaters. And they meant bodies. They look for bodies floating in the surf. And so I said, yeah, but they're running up and down the hillside. There's got to be somebody. And you could see where they were dragging their duffel bag. You could see the dog prints. The dog was with them. And so they said, well, yeah, anyway, we've already searched the bay, and go have fun, So away they went. Well, then I went around this thing, and I was just going every inch of the shoreline, and I looked down, and here's a circle of spruce trees, branches, and a guy in the middle of it waving a flag. And you talk about bringing tears to your eye. The hair went up in the back of my neck, and I just thought, it is as exciting as finding a moose. When you go moose hunting, if you can find a moose standing next to the lake where you can shoot him and not have to carry him very far, that's very exciting. A guy, he's waving a flag at me, but it's too rocky and too dark, getting too late for me to taxi in there with a boat amphibian, And so they said, okay, yeah. And then I said, how soon will you be here? And they said, well, 15 minutes. And 25 or 30 minutes went by, no Coast Guard. So I climbed back up, got to 6,000 feet, called Barbara and said, get them. And so finally, and they came back on, and I said, where are you? And they said, well, we're searching. And I said, what the hell are you searching for? I'm looking at him, and he's right under me, and I could only see one guy. So they grudgingly came in. Then it was full dark, but it was neat for me to watch it because this big searchlight goes on and shines down, and the basket goes down, the guy climbs in. It was like watching, it was surrealistic, you know, just Star Wars or something. And they just picked him up and put him into civilization. And meantime, I thought, well, only one of them, that means the girl's dead. And I was feeling bad. I thought, you know, poor kid, get dragged out in the country and left, you know, drowned or died of cold. So anyway, and they just took off for town. They never said a word to me. And I realized, well, I'm being left behind. So I went after them, and then they turned around and came back. And the searchlight goes on again, never a word to me. And another basket load comes up, and it's the girl. I thought, oh, neat. And then they just head for Homer. So I just gave the wedge and the needle, and I got here first. But there were two moose walking down the runway. It was night, and I had to buzz them and get them off the runway. And of course, they were in a helicopter, so they landed. And I ran over to the ambulance and opened the door, and I looked in, and here's this skinny little guy and a skinny little girl. And they're all, you know, they just look miserable. You'll see pictures of them somewhere. But anyway, I said, well, you know, what about the dog? They said, oh, we had to kill it. We had to kill it, but we couldn't eat it. It was our friend. And away they went to the hospital, you know. So then I'm beginning to feel good about it. Now I really thought, man, this is neat.